everyone, this is Izzy at Minerva. In today's series, we're going to start a whole new series looking at how to construct different types of waistbands. This is a really useful series because you can add your waistbands to either your skirt block or your trouser block. So we've done this as a separate little series just so you can adapt it and pick and choose which waistband you might want to add to your skirt or your trousers. So this is a really useful little series. We're going to talk you through a few standard different types of waistbands. We're going to start off by looking at how to do a faced waistband. So this is a waistband that is concealed and hidden underneath the garment, and it is worn against the skin effectively, so it's tucked under the garment. It's nicely hidden. I'm just going to be demonstrating the waistband series on our skirt block, and that will be our fitted standard block that we've filmed right at the very beginning of the series. So in order to follow along with the series, you're going to need a number of pattern drafting tools, and these will all be linked below the video, but those will include things like tracing paper, your bespoke body block, which you've obviously drawn up, either your skirt or trousers. You'll need tracing paper, a pencil, pen, ruler, scissors, obviously, as a fabric to cut out your garments with as well. Okay, so let's get straight into it. To start off with, you're going to need your skirt block, which is what I've got in front of me. Mine's printed. I printed it off on the computer because we're doing a lot of these, and it helps you to see in the video as well exactly what we're doing. However, you'll have your skirt front and back traced out and ready to go. We're going to add our facing to the top of the waistband. It's going to be tucked under, effectively under the skirt. Now at the waistband, we've got a series of darts that we will have sewn together when we construct the skirt block. However, for our facing waistband effectively, we don't need to sew in those darts, because if we sew the facing with those darts, it's going to add extra bulk to the waist, which we really don't want. So let's take a look at how we can remove that bulk. We'll start off with the skirt back. We're going to draw a line that is 7 centimetres offset from the waistband. So just mark a few consistent points and offset a nice line from the waistband. Find a gentle curve and draw that off. We'll do the same on the centre front, as the steps are very repetitive for the front and the back. Just label those up so you don't forget which one is which. So I've labelled those with their side seams and the corresponding centre back and centre front. Now we're just looking at how to create the facing. Obviously, if you're constructing the skirt, please go and refer back to one of the previous videos and make sure you understand the process of how you're drafting out your skirt independent of the waistband. What we want to do now is to remove the volume of the darts from our facing. So I'm literally going to cut out those darts. Same for the front. We'll cut out that one dart at the front. Excellent. So now we're just going to move out those darts, and we're just going to place these together, because effectively, once you've sewn up your skirt, that is the volume, that's the shape of the skirt that you get. Now we would recommend that you use a sharp pencil for all of these sorts of pattern drafting bits and bobs. We're just using fat marker pens to demonstrate the method that clearly on the video. Now that we've drafted out our facing block, we can now just trace over our pattern pieces, adding our seam allowances as required. So we've got our skirt back facing here and our skirt front facing here. We'll start off drawing around our skirt back. Our side seam, it needs a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. However, our centre back is just going to be placed on the fold, so no seam allowance required at that point. At the bottom of the facing, we're not going to have at the bottom of the facing, we won't have a seam allowance again, because it's not attaching into anything. We're either just going to fold it under or finish it in our chosen method, using our chosen method. At the top of the facing, we will add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, because this is going to attach onto the top of the skirt. Label the centre back seam to say place on fold. You may also just want to add 2 little notches up at the top of the waistband where those darts are going to tie in, and that's And that's a nice reference for when you actually sew your skirt together, because you know that at those points where those two little darts are, that's where it's going to attach onto your skirt. Skirt back facing, cut 1 on fold. Great, and then repeat the whole process with the skirt front. Annotate the pattern piece to say that it should be placed on the fold, and label the pattern piece skirt front facing, cut 1 on fold. Add your dart notch reference, so when you sew it together, that's going to be easier to sew. And then finally, we need to add the grain line to both these pattern pieces. Now, the grain line is just going to follow the centre back on that one, and the centre front is going to be parallel with those lines. So let's just take a line like this. That will be our grain line here. And likewise, it's going to run parallel with that line there. Great, it's time now to cut out our pattern pieces out of our fabric, and then we'll attach them onto a skirt just so you can see the whole process. Great, so we've cut out our skirt back on the fold and our skirt front on the fold. So we've got 2 pieces. For the purpose of this video, the right side of the fabric is facing up on the screen. It's the same on both sides, so it's quite hard to see, isn't it, sometimes? Now we're going to want our zip to be on the left-hand side of the garment as we wear it, which means that we want to attach this side first to that side seam at this point. Make sure you're doing it in the same way that I'm doing it. Otherwise, you'll accidentally put the opening of your facing on the wrong side of your skirt, which is really annoying, so let's not do that. So just sew that side seam with your standard 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Next, just open out your seam allowance and press it in place. Now you can finish your facing any way you want. There's so many different methods. You could finish it by wrapping the edge with bias binding. That's a really nice, neat way to do it. You could just overlock it and finish it off really nicely that way. Or you can just roll it under 1.5 and turn it up and press it in place. Now we're pinning this in place with our wrong sides together. Once you've pinned it in place, you can just iron it. Once you've ironed and pinned that in place, we're then just going to top stitch it with the right side facing up on the machine, and we'll top stitch it about 1 centimetre away from the folded edge. Don't forget that a top stitch length is less than 2.5, so usually about 1.6 or 1.8 mil stitch length. Great. So once you've done the facing, we've got the facing all sorted. I then want you to grab your garment, whichever you're putting it into, whether that's skirt or trousers. Now for me, I'm just going to pop it into my gathered skirt, which I did a while ago in a previous video. And at this point in my skirt, I have got an invisible zip on the left-hand side of my garment. So that's finished almost all the way up to the top. And what I'm going to do is just add the facing to the inside just to finish that off completely. To start off with, we're going to pop our facing with the right side facing up onto the right side of the skirt. Now, if you've got a zip on this side, you're wanting the facing just to line up with the raw edge at that point. And that's exactly how we want it to be. The top of your zip should be outside of the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance for the top of the waistband. So that's how we're going to encase it into this facing here. The next thing to do is just to line up your side seams so that the 2 side seams are matching perfectly. You've then got your notches, which you can line up with your darts on your skirt or trousers. You may well have slightly different reference points to me if you're doing a different type of garment and not a skirt. But as you've drafted it, you know what your reference points are. Brilliant. So once you've done the front, we'll just flip that over and we will repeat that whole process for the back skirt. Don't forget to open up your seam completely at the side seam if you've got a zip there. And at this point, I've actually got 4 notches that I'm lining up with my 4 darts here. Perfect, so we've got all of our waistband now pinned in place along the top of the waistband. But I just want to talk you through what happens at the side seam here where we've got our zip. So what we want to do is to pin this facing all the way down the raw edge, and we are going to sew up here and across. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us just to capture that zip in between the facing and the outer skirt. So do the same on both sides and just make sure that you've lined that up really nicely. You know how that's going to go. Now, at this point here, we do want to be sewing along here, but we've got our zip in between. So for that reason, I'm going to use my zipper foot to just sew as close as I can along the facing to get that zip to sit as close as possible to the facing of the skirt. So I'm going to sew up here first, just a nice straight line, following the contour of the zip up to there. I'm going to repeat the same for the other side while I've got my zipper foot on my machine. I'm going to sew up to that point, and then I can just use a standard sewing machine foot to sew around the circumference of the rest of the waistband. And so at this point, I've just sewn it from the bottom of the facing up to about 1.5 centimetres from the top up there. And when I turn that through the right way, it just means that the facing is going to encase that zip really nicely. Brilliant. We've done the same on the other side as well, so they're both completed in the same way. And now we're just going to sew all the way around the top. Now, as you can see, we've got a nice, sharp, neat point here. Our zip is encased inside. However, if we turn it out just like that, we're going to have quite a lot of bulk at this point here. So, to resolve that issue, we're just going to snip off the corner like this. And we've left a few millimetres of space there. And what that does is it just allows us to turn it out and reduce all the bulk. You can also reduce the bulk of the facing by just trimming down the facing seam allowance in half like this. And you can do that all the way along the entire length of the waistband facing. Brilliant. So at this point, just turn the facing so that the wrong sides of the fabric are together and iron it in place. So when you're ironing your facing, you don't want it to be showing on the outside of the garment. So make sure that when you're ironing it, you're just rolling it under slightly so that when you have the skirt facing right side out, you can't see the facing or ridge of the facing. So I've just tucked it under by just a couple of millimetres at that point. Perfect. So if we zip up the zip, that's looking pretty good. We've ironed our facing in place, and there we have it. A beautiful finished waistband with no obvious waistband really, because it's just a facing, isn't it? And on the inside you've got a nice bit of the right side facing up so that it just looks really beautifully finished. Now there are a couple more things that you could choose to do at this point if you wanted. So you could understitch the facing to the seam allowance and just do a nice little neat row of stitches on the inside there. Or you could, if you wanted, it's a style choice, you could just do a nice long row of stitches on the outside, holding the facing down to the skirt as well. Another option that you could do is just to sew a stitch in the ditch, which is where you sew in between the fold where two pieces of fabric are meeting. So you could just stitch down there and down there, down the side seams and down the 4 darts at the back. And again, that would just hold the facing in place. But fundamentally, you've now drafted your facing and you've attached it into your skirt or trousers. So a great big well done. I think you've done a fantastic job to get this far. It's a really nice, neat finish. It's very just subtle and subdued, a finish of a skirt. And we really love that facing technique. It's really useful in all sorts of areas. So this is our faced waistband, which we've added onto the gathered skirt, which we showed you how to do in a previous video. So with this one, it really doesn't look like anything in particular, does it? You can't really necessarily see that it's a really big feature, but it's just really subtle in the way that it's just hidden underneath the skirt. So thanks for joining me today. This has been great fun doing this faced waistband. Hope you've really enjoyed it. Please do feel free to pop your comments below the video. We always love to hear from you as ever. And if you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to watch the rest of them. We've got a whole load more waistband episodes to come. Don't forget that you can create your free Minerva account on our website, and you can upload your photos and follow the maker community there as well. If you've been following the pattern drafting series and you've been doing some experiments with your skirt blog, we would absolutely love to see those. So please do post them on our Minerva Maker community and we would love to see them. Thanks for joining me today. I will see you next time.